Bona tarda. Benvingudes, benvinguts. Soc el Cristian, soc el director de l'Institut Català Internacional per la Pau, l'ICIP. Aquest és un acte que organitzem conjuntament amb el Centre Delàs d'Estudis per la Pau i NOVACT, en el marc d'un projecte que tenim en aliança amb l'Ajuntament de Barcelona, que l'hem anomenat Barcelona for Peace. Deixeu-me fer una petita enquesta improvisada amb alçada. Quants de vosaltres, o qui de vosaltres, creieu que el món avui, en termes de conflicte armat, drets humans i democràcia, està pitjor que fa 5 anys? Efectivament, és bastant demostrable que tots els indicadors actuals són alarmants. És a dir, tenim més conflictes armats que mai, tenim més persones que fugen de la guerra, desplaçades o refugiades que mai, i aquesta situació coincideix també amb que tenim una despesa militar arreu del món que cada any bat el rècord de l'any anterior. Alhora també els reptes de cohesió social dins de cada país es tensionen, la falta de confiança amb les institucions públiques incrementa, la incertesa, la por davant del futur és un caldo de cultiu propici per a aquells que tenen propostes simples per problemes complexes, i realment creix arreu del món també el nombre d'autoritarismes. I es poden dir Putin, es poden dir Xi Jinping, Trump, Khomeini, Ortega, Murillo, arreu del món trobem casos similars. Deixeu-me fer la segona pregunta d'aquesta enquesta amb alçada. Quants de vosaltres creieu, o qui de vosaltres creieu, que d'aquí 5 anys, mirant cap al futur, podem revertir aquesta tendència? D'aquí 5 anys. Bueno, així com mirant enrere tenim certeses de com estem comparant-nos, mirant cap endavant no deixa de ser un exercici especulatiu. Òbviament no tenim indicadors ara, o tenim pocs indicadors d'esperança, però la paradoxa és que amb aquest ambient de pessimisme, si voleu, d'escepticisme, si voleu, de desànim, que en certa manera crec que explica que poques persones hagueu alçat la mà, no és propi només del nostre context, això passa a molts països arreu del món. Però passa en un moment on la tendència que hem descrit, que vivim, que patim, no és el fruit de la voluntat de la ciutadania, és el fruit del poder d'uns pocs que acumulen més poder polític, més poder tecnològic i més poder econòmic que mai abans en la història. I que no només tenen aquest poder, sinó a més són capaços d'imposar un actuar i a partir d'aquí també un imaginari col·lectiu que ens té d'aquesta manera, si voleu, desconcertats, òbviament, i més aviat pessimistes mirant cap al futur. La majoria de la població, si tinguéssim possibilitat de dir col·lectivament la nostra, probablement no és aquest l'escenari que voldríem, i en dibuixaríem un d'altre. Per tant, els que defensem el bé comú seguim sent una immensa majoria i que tenim el repte, òbviament, davant d'un desequilibri de poder creixent, de fer sentir la nostra veu. La tasca és tan gran que no la pot emprendre per si sol ningú. Els sistemes multilaterals no són capaços, Nacions Unides, Unió Europea, OSCE, tots els altres, en aquests moments, de frenar aquesta tendència. I inevitablement som un ecosistema d'actors, actors socials, actors culturals, actors acadèmics, actors institucionals, sobretot també de poders subestatals, com poden ser ciutats, com Granollers o com Barcelona, o entitats com el govern de la Generalitat de Catalunya. En aquests moments, en aquest racó del sud-oest d'Europa, som un petit oasi dins d'un context europeu, d'una tendència cap a retallades amb la cooperació al desenvolupament, increment de despesa militar, però també retallades amb esforços diplomàtics per prevenir i resoldre els conflictes armats. I mentre estan aquí, l'any passat vam fer un procés participatiu, Fòrum Català per la Pau, per elaborar propostes per dotar-nos d'una política pública de pau de Catalunya en una aliança singular i molt fructífera entre actors socials i la institucionalitat. I en aquests moments el projecte Barcelona for Peace, que en aquests moments estem encapçalant NOVACT, Delàs i l'ICIP, té el mateix propòsit. Barcelona té una llarga trajectòria social però també institucional de compromís amb els valors de la pau, la democràcia i els drets humans i vol reforçar aquest compromís i és per això que neix, ara ja no ha sortit aquí, aquesta idea d'un projecte Barcelona for Peace. Avui aquest és el primer acte d'aquesta aposta. És una aposta que té vocació de creixement, d'inclusió, de diversificació i de reforç d'impacte. Hem anomenat l'acte d'avui, hem agafat primer el terme que es fa servir en mobilitzacions als Estats Units, a Itàlia, en altres llocs, que són No Kings, No War. L'hem traduït al català, ni guerra ni tirans. Creiem que és un lema que en el context actual té un potencial de mobilització d'aquestes àmplies majories arreu del món. I tenim la vocació, des de fa molts anys, i la volem refermar avui, que des d'aquí siguem un dels epicentres de mobilització social, però també, de nou, en aliances, en diàleg, com escoltarem avui, amb múltiples actors, que no necessàriament hem de tenir la mateixa perspectiva, però sí que poden tenir uns mateixos objectius. Sense més, agraeixo la vostra presència. Li passaré ara la paraula a la Rita Marzoa, periodista i també mediadora de formació, però també en la pràctica, que serà també qui presentarà les dues persones ponents que hem convidat el dia d'avui. Moltes gràcies a tot l'equip, a tots els equips, totes les persones de l'ICIP, NOVACT i Delàs per haver fet possible aquest acte, a l'Ajuntament amb qui hem treballat amb aliança amb aquest esforç i amb tots els altres actors de l'ecosistema de Barcelona. Gràcies.
Moltes gràcies, moltes gràcies. Bona tarda, benvingudes, benvinguts. Veig molta gent coneguda, molta gent bonica, molts homes i dones i persones que han vingut aquí per conjurar una energia que a veure si esclata d'una vegada i neteja i fa llum per tot arreu. Avui concentrem aquesta energia per poder parlar de regnes tòxics. Deia que No War, No Kings ho havíem traduït com no guerres i no tirans. La literalitat és això, aquests regnats tòxics que ens fan tanta angúnia. Us hem convocat a un vespre titulat d'aquesta manera i ho fem en aquest Hub per la Pau, que vol ser aquest Barcelona for Peace, amb un projecte que, com deia, l'impulsen l'ICIP, el Centre Delàs, l'organització NOVACT i l'Ajuntament de Barcelona, amb un objectiu que és posicionar la ciutat, la capital del país, en referència internacional en la cultura de pau. Ja ho és aquesta ciutat referent de cultura de pau. Ja fa molts anys que aquest país es projecta des d'aquesta cultura de la pau. Però ara més que mai segurament hem d'alçar aquesta veu i hem de reivindicar-nos com el que som. Sabem que més enllà dels discursos del xoc de civilitzacions, dels que se serveixen aquests nous emperadors, aquests nous tirans al món, no només polítics, també ho comentava, sobretot econòmics, hi ha una societat civil també que batega, que vol construir ponts, que vol frenar l'avenç d'aquesta tirania a tot arreu. Ho hem vist en infinitat de moviments per la pau i la justícia global. Sap greu posar noms i cognoms, però probablement no ens podem treure de la retina ni del cervell el relat de grans activistes que aquests dies han estat torturats pel règim d'Israel, la Global Summit Flotilla, per exemple, per posar un exemple. Una reacció d'aquesta societat civil que mostra La cara més crua i en forma de genocidi, guerres, atacs, dret internacional, racisme, xenofòbia, antifeminisme, repressió de les llibertats, en un context com l'actual. Ens calen veus fermes, veus que generin i que guiïn oposició, resistència a aquests imperis tòxics. Avui aquí tindrem l'oportunitat d'escoltar dos referents de lucidesa, de treball incansable, per a aquesta construcció de pau que abordaran qüestions de rabiosa actualitat, com és la lluita en les polítiques racistes i polaritzadores de Donald Trump, de Vladimir Putin, el món dels fanàtics religiosos a Israel, però també a l'Iran, tants i tants d'altres. Com es configura aquest poder dels nous tirans i què significa? Quins són? Actuen sols o actuen al dictat? Això també serà interessant de saber-ho. Qui són? Quina és la situació de les forces democràtiques, també, per exemple, a l'Iran, lluitant contra aquest règim dels ayatoles, que no sabem en quin estadi està. Com construïm un front comú per la igualtat, per la pau, per la justícia, per la democràcia? Avui tenim un luxe de disposar d'aquestes dues veus que us comentava per bastir ponts des de la ciutat de Barcelona. Avui ens acompanyen John Powell, que és el seu aniversari, l'han fet bufar espelmes fa una estona, el podeu felicitar. Ell és un nord-americà de Detroit, catedràtic de la Universitat de Berkeley, a Califòrnia, i director de l'Authoring and Belonging Institute. És expert, com us deia, en xenofòbia, en polarització, en desigualtat, en aquests discursos d'odi que tant ens posen la pell de gallina i que no entenem com poden fer-se carn amb tanta facilitat. Ha estat una de les veus i dels actors més potents i influents en aquest poderós moviment del Black Lives Matter pels drets de les persones afroamericanes al seu país, contra aquest racisme estructural i contra aquests abusos policials que han acabat amb víctimes mortals fins i tot. I a l'altra banda, que és la mateixa banda, la Sanam Naraghi-Anderlini. Ella és iraniana, va néixer a Teheran l'any 67, és una de les més grans expertes mundials en dona, pau, seguretat, amb 25 anys d'experiència com a estratega en pau en conflictes, en crisis i en extremismes violents. Va ser una de les redactores de la històrica resolució 1325 del Consell de Seguretat de Nacions Unides l'any 2000 i ella és fundadora i directora de la xarxa internacional d'acció de la societat civil, l'ICANN, formada per organitzacions de dones de més de 40 països i estats. També, bona tarda i benvingut. També la podeu aplaudir. No és el seu aniversari, però també la podeu aplaudir. Amb ells, com dèiem, volem interpretar i volem dibuixar en aquesta Barcelona que es vol projectar. John i Sanam, gràcies per avui acompanyar-nos. Jo crec que hem de poder començar. Avui mantindrem una conversa d'una bona estona, perquè val la pena. La dividirem en 3 grans blocs. Un primer bloc en què intentarem parlar d'aquesta tirania i d'aquest poder tòxic i d'aquest poder horrible que en aquests moments ens governa. Una segona part d'aquesta conversa versarà sobre aquesta polarització i aquesta desigualtat que generen aquests règims tirànics, però volem dedicar una gran part d'aquesta conversa, perquè creiem que és la manera de sortir-nos-en d'aquí, en intentar buscar aquelles propostes de pau i democràcia que ens han d'aconseguir crear camins, obrir finestres per sortir d'aquesta foscor fastigosa. I que comenci qui vulgui, jo llançaré preguntes. Segur que al principi hauré de mirar per donar la veu. Estic convençuda que a partir d'un moment jo ja no caldrà ni que gairebé intervingui, sí, per fer alguna pregunta, però per conversar amb ells dos. Quin és el poder real i qui són aquests tirans del segle XXI?
Well, I'll start. First of all, it's great to be here, and it's nice to see a full house, maybe even standing room only. All of you sitting down and standing up for peace. So, who are these tyrants? Well, they are all over the world. We have a tyrant in the United States who would very much like to not just be, I would say, not just a tyrant and not just a king. Are you ready for this? Mm-hmm. He would like to be God. Mm-hmm. And some of you may think I'm joking, But if you saw the picture where he portrayed himself as Jesus, he put that on his own website. And even his own followers was so upset that he had to take it down and then say, well, you misunderstood. I was actually trying to say something else. But it does speak to the inflated assessment he has of himself, that he sees himself as divine. And it's not just him, I would say his followers. This is not a traditional political fight. It's a fight for the soul of the country, if not the world. And there are different views that are being put forward. And one view is the view that Donald Trump has, and that Elon Musk have, and that J.D. Vance have, and the list goes on. And there's some view of dominance, and Steve Miller was very articulate in terms of saying, we're done with talking. We're done with dialogue. This is the real world. And the real world is about power. And he says some people are supposed to lead. Some people are supposed to dominate. That's who we are. So that's the vision that they have, a world not of laws, a world not of respect, a world not of mutuality, but a world of power, where people, in this case in the United States, care first and foremost, not about people in the United States, but a small group of kleptomaniacs who are willing to rob and steal from their own country and bomb other countries for their own gain. In some ways, it's not surprising. This sort of type of leader has been prefigured for thousands of years. The Greeks wrote about it. What's surprising is that so many people in the United States line up behind them. And in some ways, that's maybe the more interesting question. It's not that Trump wants to be God. You might say, who doesn't want to be God? Well, I don't, but who else? You know, a lot of people glorifying the idea of being all-powerful. Why do so many people line up behind him? Well, the simple answer, and it's a more complex answer, but the simple answer is because so many people feel powerless. So many people feel like their ability to affect the future is gone, and that the future is coming forward where they and their group, however they define it, will not belong. So we literally have the Proud Boys, which is a right-wing group in the United States, marching down the streets chanting a Nazi anti-Semitic meme, Jews will not replace us. What they're saying is that they're worried, no matter if the worry is irrational, that Jews will somehow replace them. You see the same thing coming out of Hungary. You see the same thing coming out of India. Muslims will not replace us. And so what they're tapping into is this deep, deep fear that a future is unfolding where their group will not belong, where their group will not thrive, where their group will be replaced by some other group. And this actually is activating what we call the old part of the brain. It's actually coming out of fear. It's not a rational thought. And so when we respond to this by rational logic, it doesn't work. Many of us have children, and some of us used to be children. And when you have a child that's really afraid, it doesn't work to say, stop being afraid. It doesn't work to say, there's no monster under your bed. That's ridiculous. Now you not only left the monster under the bed, you've also insulted your child. You said you're stupid. And so what Trump says is that you're afraid. And why are you afraid? The world is changing. It's out of hand. You can't control it. But I can. And your fears not only are there, I'm going to help sharpen your fears. What's at fault? Why you're not having the future you want is because of the other. And the other is a racial other. The other is an other with a different religion. The other is another who approaches love differently. The other is made up. The other is a sociological construct. But once that construct is in place, it seems very real. So we then have the story about the other. And the story is strange, from scale people capturing babies to people from Haiti eating cats. And again, when we hear this, it's like, who could believe that? That is so bizarre. And so it becomes us against them. And the us, the we, becomes really small. And they define the we in small terms. So in the United States, J.D. Vance makes it clear, he's talking about a Christian, not even just a Christian we, he's talking about a Protestant we. A Protestant we. So Catholics don't get a pass. And again, the absurdity of this is just too ironic to actually believe. His wife, as you know, is a lawyer from India. And when people asked him, how can you be married and have children with someone who's from India who believes in Hinduism? And he says, I'm hoping for a conversion. Really said that. So anyway, I could go on and on, I won't, but the point is that the tyrants in some ways are not new. I mean, maybe Trump is many things, but he's skilled at talking to the lizard. He's skilled at flaming our fears. He's skilled at creating a sense of belonging for a small group. And then the move is transfer all your power to me. And so democracy is inconvenient. Peace is inconvenient. That I'm here, I'm the only one that can protect you from a future where you won't belong. And so that's kind of a pretty dark picture. The good news is this, two things, and I'll stop. The good thing is this, that much of the othering, much of the dehumanization, much of the violence is in service of belonging. People are trying to find a way to belong. And people who go to Trump rallies say, if you go there, you leave there, even if you don't agree with them, with a sense of this was the community. That's what he's offering people. And that's the antidote, is that what people really crave, all of us, is to belong. And there's a recent study showing that the millionaires and billionaires coming out of Silicon Valley are in this deep malaise, because even though they're making all this money, they feel like their life is meaningless. They don't have a place where their life thrives. And so I think this is our possibility, to not just be against Trump, to not just be against the tyrant, to not just be against the kings, but to offer something positive to each other. And an expression of that, which I'll maybe come back to later, came out of Minnesota. When you watch thousands and thousands of people in sub-zero weather coming out in the streets on behalf of immigrants, on behalf of undocumented people. And in Minnesota, which I do a lot of work in, is one of the whitest states in the country. And yet they were out there in the streets in sub-zero weather saying, these people are our neighbors. They're not the other. These people belong to us. And they coined a phrase called neighborliness, which is a kind of bridging, which is a kind of expanding the we. And in that effort, which few people expected, they stared down ice. They broke ice, but they broke it with love and nonviolence and bridging.
Quan estava parlant d'aquestes pors infantils, de sentir el monstre sota el llit, que ens aixecaven el llençol, miràvem i efectivament no hi havia res a sota del llit, però tu t'estiraves al llit i continuaves sentint que allà sota hi havia alguna cosa, no et tranquil·litzaves fins que algú t'abraçava. Potser és això, no?, també, el que segurament es necessita. Hi ha tirans de color taronja, hi ha tirans d'una altra mena. En aquest cas, també el règim dels aiatoles. Parlem d'aquests tirans.
Thank you. You know, first of all, I want to thank everybody, because for the last 12 hours that we've been here and meeting with Catalans and Spaniards and others, everyone's spoken English to us. So thank you for making us feel belonging and not speaking your language. To your question about tyrants, I come from a country with 6,000 years of history. And if you look at Persian literature and poetry, it is replete with examples, whether of real figures, mythical figures, animals that take on real human figures, of tyrants and of bad leaders and so forth, and of societies that have resisted and thrived. And so being in America, where I lived for 22 years, and seeing the rise of Trump, and then the elections that we had, it really felt as if I was sitting there as an older person watching a teenager going through adolescence, in the sense that, okay, you're now beginning to experience what many of us older civilizations have gone through when you start off with some grand vision of the kind of governance you're going to have, and then when you have bad people coming into power to exploit those issues. And so to your tyrants question, I would say two things. In the context of the Western world, and especially in the United States, in the last 40 years, so since Reagan and Thatcher, we have entered the realm of extreme capitalism. Not just normal capitalism, extreme capitalism. And in the era of extreme capitalism, we're seeing the height of it now. Maybe it's going to get worse. It's this notion of not only I want what's mine, I also want what's yours, and it's never enough. And so it creates a zero-sum game. And that mentality has now spread across our politics, across our society, across our social media. It's all about wealth. I think John pointed that out as well. We're not valuing other things. So, we put Musk up as some god, whereas in reality he is a man who has had 15 children and is horrific to his various partners and wives, and he's on drugs, and he's cheating his workers, and so forth. The concept of shame has gone. The concept of being a good public servant has gone. So part of the element of tyranny for me is that this is the air that we're all breathing, and we have to at some point stop and say, this air doesn't work for us anymore, and we have to change it. And we have to challenge the enablers. So in the United States, the first group that went and kissed the ring of Trump were the law firms. This is a country of rule of law. And it was the law firms who were the first ones to go and say, we're going to help you bend and break the rules so that we can still make money. Right? It was the media, the supposed fifth column of democracy that is meant to hold governments accountable. I have never seen a more pandering media than in the United States in the 22 years that I lived there. Literally, because the way they talk to politicians is yes, sir, no, sir. It's never challenging them. It's never challenging the lies. I grew up in England. In England, when you bring a politician onto the television, he or she has to answer questions. So now why do they do that? Because of money. Because at the end of the day, money is God. And that really has been, for me, the one thing that the US culturally has sadly sent out into the rest of the world. And bringing it to the tyrants that we're talking about around the world. There was a moment, when many of us were growing up, we had communism and we had capitalism, we had political control and economic safety nets, supposedly, and then political freedom and no economic safety nets. Now we're getting to the convergence where they want political control and no economic safety nets. We're getting the worst of both worlds coming as the dominant sort of model of governance. And as John said, this is a moment where people are feeling fearful and they don't have a sense of belonging, or they feel that the other is coming and taking their jobs, even though we know that most people who come as economic migrants are often doing the jobs that our locals don't want to do. Or they come and they're becoming more educated than our own citizens and doing the jobs that our own citizens don't want to do. In England, if you go to the National Health Service, you will rarely see a white British person. It is dominated by Filipinos and Bangladeshis and Nigerians and Ukrainians and others who are trained in their own countries and are bringing their medical skills to serve the British public. So it's the narrative that I think is a real problem. But it's a narrative that enables, or in democracies elevates, they can use it and they elevate themselves. Once they get into power, they use the tools of governance. So what I've seen in the US, to me, is with Trump coming in this time, the creation of ICE, or the expansion of ICE, $40 billion or something that was given to ICE. That to me sounds like the Revolutionary Guard in Iran. We had an army and a police. The Revolutionary Guard is the guard to protect the revolution. It's the guard to protect the regime, right? ICE is beholden. The guys and men and women, but predominantly men who work for ICE, are beholden to Trump. So he is creating a space where soon we're going to have an army that it actually has an alternative army. That it's a parallel security structure that is being created. We've had 47 years of experience of that in our country. Countries that have been through dictatorships and tyranny before know that when you get people coming into power who want to dominate, that's exactly what they do. They create their own intelligence, and they create their own security forces, and they create their own community networks that then become the eyes and ears of that state. So tyranny doesn't just emerge out of nothing. It becomes structured, and it benefits those who participate in it, and it ends up creating its own sort of economy as well, and that's something that we're seeing in the U.S. and we've seen elsewhere. Now, tyranny, tyrants elsewhere, yeah, of course. If you think about, now, what do we mean by tyrants? I think this is also interesting. If you look at what China is doing now, China's leadership is, they had a moment of opening in the 1990s. Now it's gone back to Maoist tendencies. But China's engagement with the world was not through war. China's engagement was, we'll come and we'll build bridges and we'll put you in debt to the rest for the next 3 generations, but we'll give you some roads, we'll give you some stadiums, we'll give you various things. But they have influence. The United States, in the last 20 years, has chosen violence as its language in the world. And the war on Iran is its moment of complete demise, because a country that is much smaller, with a military budget which is minuscule, has just shown that that might, which is the only way the US has been engaging the world, actually doesn't work. So I think the US is going to have a moment of identity crisis, actually. And the question then becomes, when you have a tiger that is feeling threatened or is bleeding, how violent are they really going to be in the rest of the world? And that's part of what I kind of think about and worry about, and why the concept of trying to make peace in the region is important, because it's not just the Middle East, it's now the rest of the world as well. And we have a moment where it could get better over the next 5 years, and of course it could get a lot worse.
Tenim aquests tigres agressius i la pregunta és on arribaran, i la pregunta potser també ha de ser com els podrem frenar sense aquesta comunitat, cada cop probablement més dissolta en un món paral·lel que ens absorbeix l'enteniment a través de productes mediàtics fabricats i dirigits absolutament, perquè ja ens hem carregat la premsa com l'enteníem romànticament fa uns anys, ja no existeix. El periodisme existeix en un món paral·lel amb grans resistències, però no com a gran indústria, en un món en què la indústria és l'algoritme, i en un món en què aquests tigres, amb la seva violència, arrosseguen voluntats i nacions. Com cedem el tigre? Com frenem el tigre?
It's an interesting question. And what the thing that comes to mind for me initially is that a tiger is a big cat.
Yes. A big cat.
A big cat, But cats are not the only thing out there. There are dogs and there are other. So we learned from French philosopher Foucault that power is always diffuse. That we all have power. And we see with Trump, for example, the largest army, the largest military spending in the world. And yet,
Sí, ho anava a dir, però no el volia tallar, disculpeu. Val. Sorry,
No
there's
problem.
no translation. Okay, yet.
And yet when people, countries, institutions stand up to him, something happens. It's like, we're going to bring the world to its knees. We're going to use terrorists to reorder the world. And when a country says, you're going to charge us terrorists, we're going to charge you terrorists. So, okay, let's talk. When he goes to China and says, you're the main culprit in terms of unequal trade, and maybe there's something there. We're going to stop trade. China says, we're going to stop rare earth. Well, let's talk. Let's not be rash. So time and time again, when people have stood up, this big, mighty tiger says, oh, okay. He said with Iran, we're going to wipe out your civilization. And it's going to take us a week. Okay, maybe we're not going to wipe out your civilization. And maybe it's going to take longer than a week. And so what I'm saying is that, in a sense, we have to be grounded in our own moral sensibilities. We have to know where we won't go. And we have to do it collectively, not individually. I work with hundreds of foundations in the United States. They have something that they call Unite in Advance. I think we're up to 700 now. And they said, we will not bend our knee, we will not cave in, and we will actually work to support each other. And Trump had threatened to remove all of their tax benefits, to destroy them. He hasn't done that. He's looking for someone who's willing to cow, someone who's willing to cave in, and he threatens people. And once he threatens people, he threatens you again and again and again. It doesn't stop. So part of it, I think, is us having our own voice. He threatened Spain. What do you mean you won't let us use your airspace? Aren't you part of NATO? And Spain says, this is not a legitimate war. We're going to have to really think about our relationship with Spain. Has he done anything yet? I'm not saying he won't. But standing up for your own values, and standing up not by yourself, with all those who share those values, is one of the ways that we turn this tiger into a kitty cat. A kitty cat can still do damage, but Trump needs compliance. And so one of the things that's so disappointing is that when he's confronted people and institutions of power, like law firms, they haven't used their resources to say no. They've said, we will capitulate. We will do whatever you want. We will give you millions and millions of dollars of ours pro bono, and you decide who we sue. These are some of the most powerful firms in the United States. When he turns to the tech companies, same thing. So he's actually picking off people who are willing to, as they say, bend to the knee. And I think, to me, there are a number of reasons I'm here. We have wonderful staff here. Miriam is here with her father. But we also have friends, Luca and Tim, who are, we in the United States are looking to you and saying, Europe is standing up. Europe is standing for peace. And that's actually powerful. And then we find out when we get here that Europe is looking to us. They're looking to Minnesota. And they say, you're standing up. And that's powerful. Wherever we see people standing up is powerful. And then we look to Iran. And as we say, we're not supporting the existing regime in Iran, but neither are we supporting the existing regime in the United States. Neither are we supporting illegal wars. And so it becomes a more complex story. So I think part of it is us finding our own story and sharing it with other people. And we say belonging without othering, that everybody matters. Everybody have a voice, not because they have hundreds and thousands of nuclear missiles, not because they spend $1 trillion on military, but because everybody matters, full stop. And you've done laws, and you've done conferences, and you've had to say that, but now to insist upon that in the face of this mad tiger. One thing I will say, Trump is worried. His support has declined. Is in the mid-30s. And the war in Iran is extremely unpopular in the United States, even among his base. And so the received wisdom is he has to have a truce. He has to have something to show people by July 4th. He has 6 or 7 weeks to finish this war, or the American people will turn on him. And so he's looking for a way out. And I'm not saying whatever, we should continue the war, but I'm saying this paper tiger, his weakness is being exposed by a country that was not supposed to be able to stand up. He depends on your not standing up. So part of what we do is to stand up together, and stand up for the things that we know are right, stand up for each other, and support each other, as they did in Minnesota, as you've done here. I think that's the way we defeat not only the paper tiger, but we actually promote our own vision of the future where everyone belongs.
Jo crec que aquesta serà la tarda de les metàfores, perquè estem veient el tigre, però és que estem veient l'arena d'un circ romà on hi ha un tigre, hi ha un lleó, hi ha un, no sé, un cocodril, i tots estan traient les extremitats els uns als altres. Ens fa por que saltin cap a la grada, que és on estem tots mirant atònits què està passant, i sabem, perquè fa molts anys que vivim en aquesta cultura de pau, com es fa la pau, però també patim perquè no sabem si tenim temps d'aturar aquests animals salvatges que estan acabant, per no dir que ja han acabat, amb Palestina, que estan intentant acabar amb el Líban, que estan intentant acabar amb qualsevol espai on aquest tigre es veu valent, tranquil, per mossegar, estripar, i com es frena aquesta bogeria? Tindrem temps de frenar-la?
Thank you. You know, one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about, and in my network with women we see very often, is what are we fighting for? Because what you fight for, you can fight against something, but actually if you focus on the negative, it can be exhausting. It can actually be very tiring and draining. And the forces of far-right extremism, whether it's Israel, whether it's in the US, whether it's here, they want the tactic of exhausting us. They want to sow chaos so that we just all eventually say, I can't deal with it anymore. It's the summer. I want to just go read a novel and be done with it. So the organizing part is really, really important, because we need to be able to calibrate who has energy and who doesn't. When do we come together? What is performative action? What is actual change? And does our action give us joy and energy, or does it deplete? These are things that we have to think about as we imagine it. But that question of being able to say, today it's our turn, tomorrow we're going to be tired, somebody else step in, is really important. And the focus is really important. If you look at, and I'll give you a couple examples. In America, every time there's a mass shooting, and it happens regularly now, and there's a big outrage, the laws governing guns become weakened afterwards. Why? Because the gun lobby waits until all the public noise and all the public how terrible dies down and people go back to their ordinary lives. They're focused on the legislation to weaken and weaken and weaken. We, as citizens of European countries, need to understand the forces that are at play in our political spaces. This is a time for advanced citizenship. And advanced citizenship means not just being in the streets. The streets are very important because the politicians don't like when you have protests, but it also means being in their offices the next day on the Monday and the Tuesday and the Wednesday, because that's when the arms companies are there. That's when they are coming along and selling their narrative of we need security, and security comes in the form of tanks and missiles and $800 billion security budgets for Europe that is borrowed money from the future and is cutbacks in the actual security that we need for our societies. How do they do that? They do that by being at the European Commission. They do that by being in our political spaces. That's the kind of organizing that we also need. So it's advanced citizenship and understanding that. The question of what are we fighting for is also critical because, as I say, it gives you a sense of purpose. When Trump said, we're going to wipe out the Iranian civilization, do you know what people in Iran did? They went out and they said, we're going to bomb your infrastructure. They had already bombed our universities, our hospitals, cement factories, energy plants, the oil depot in the south of Tehran, a city of 9 million people. So imagine the entire explosion and the oil seeping into the sky and into the soil and into the water. This war is not just the tigers and the crocodiles. I wish it was just them in an arena where we could watch and throw popcorn. This is real life, real people. But when Trump said, we're going to come and destroy your civilization, and the Israelis said, we're going to come and destroy your infrastructures, Iranians went out and stood on the bridges. They stood on every damn bridge and held hands. A 12th century bridge in Dezful, people were just standing there and saying, come and drop the damn bomb. That is fighting for something. That is fighting for your civilization. That's fighting for your nation. That's fighting. It's almost irrelevant what the regime is. That was fighting for what belonged to us as a civilization. And this is something that I think in Europe we have to bring back. That the Europe that we have, and I count myself as European, even though my country voted for Brexit, we're begging to come back in, frankly. This is the most successful peace project in humanity. For a spit of land in the world that caused 2 world wars and was killing each other for centuries, to have 80 years of peace and prosperity where everybody gets to be included and everybody belongs without erasing their identity. So you can be a Spaniard and European, you're a Portuguese and European. The Spanish cheese is recognized alongside the specific French cheese, alongside the specific Irish cheese. This is an extraordinary socio-economic, political project. And it is the envy of the world, frankly. But it is being threatened by the far right inside, by the US, by the Russians. And what they're doing is that we have an expression in Farsi that is, they're running mice. They're throwing mice in to scare everybody. And the scare tactics is to say it's the immigrants that are causing the problem. It's not the immigrants, right? The immigrants are enabling society to run. So, and there are not that many of them anyway. If you think, oh, our civilization or our society is being browned out or whatever it is, these are all nonsense messages. Europe as a plural, as a successful example of diversity becoming similarities in social cohesion. Similarities of the vision that we want, what kind of rights that we want, what kind of laws that we want. This is something worth fighting for. And this is the moment where that collective action is really going to be important, because there are forces that want to separate us. So I think this is something for us to bear in mind. And then to the point about giving each other courage. When the war started, the Norwegians were amongst the first to stand up and say we're against this war, the Nordics. And I was in touch with some senior political figures by text. And I said, thank you for doing this. This is an illegal war. Thank you for standing up for this. And the response was, thank you very much, but we're kind of alone out here. And it's a lonely voice. And I said, this is important because this international law that we talk about isn't just something that happened out of the blue 80 years ago when the UN was created. It is 500 years of human endeavor and millions of lives lost to give us the concept of international law and what is an illegal war and what is not, and so forth. One generation can't throw it away just because they've had it easy. So you have to stand up for this. This is what it is. And his response to me was, I hadn't thought about it like that. Now, subsequently, the Nordics have all stood up. Spain was such an important voice in terms of saying they're going to stand. Then the Austrians came and the Italians came. And you realize that whether it's an individual state, an individual leader, a person who happens to have text messaging with some important guy somewhere, each of us actually can do things. And that moment of saying, what can I do, is really important, because you matter. You are citizens in democratic societies. People are dying to have what you have. And so that freedom of expression is no longer just a right, it's a responsibility. The freedom to take political action is no longer just a right, it becomes a responsibility. And when you stand up and one person does it, the next person has the courage to do it, and so forth and so on. And that becomes the collective force that we are. So it is about the moment of advanced citizenship and thinking, what are we fighting for? And who are we fighting for? Which is our children, actually. And taking the stance to do it. In England, I'm incredibly grateful because the pensioners, the teachers that are retired teachers, retired doctors, retired military people, were the ones who went and sat in front of Parliament Square in support of Palestine action, knowing that they could get arrested and charged with terrorism, and knowing that if a young person came and got arrested and charged with terrorism, they would have a criminal record for the rest of their lives. So the elderly did it. They took their action. These are the moments when we see what democracy is and what it means to be fighting for our values and standing up for them. And so, it's finding the courage inside and speaking out and saying, I can do something, and then seeing that your actions have a ripple effect as well.
Estem, però, cultivant una societat perquè passi això. Ara parlava de jubilats, de persones grans que van anar davant del Parlament de Westminster per evitar que els joves tinguessin aquestes condemnes de per vida, però els joves no hi van anar per evitar la condemna de per vida o perquè no se senten interpel·lats? Què passa amb aquesta nova generació de gent més jove immersa en l'algoritme, molta de la qual, no sé si dir crítica, però hi ha maneres d'avançar en aquest sentit?
So I think a lot of the work we need to do is to find more and more ways to engage with each other, including the young people. I teach at the University of California, Berkeley. And they threaten everybody, but they threaten the students who are from overseas. And some of the universities, like some of the law firms, caved in, but some stood up. And one of the things, we have levers of power. We have to be thoughtful about how we use those levers. So what the Trump administration said is that you have to do these 5 things, and if you do them right away, we will fast track your federal grants. And universities in the United States live off of federal grants. We get billions of dollars from the federal grant. They said, so if you do these things, if you stop the Palestinian protests, if you get rid of critical race theory, stop talking about race, if you get rid of gender studies, stop talking about women, if you have people who are, anyway, they went on and on. You do these things, remove certain books, we will make sure you get your money fast. I live in California. Governor Newsom is our governor and someone I have a personal relationship with. You know what he did? He said, if any university in California accepts that agreement from Trump, we will cut off all your state money. And your state money, on average, is larger than your federal money. So if you're going to take this deal from Trump, we're going to punish you. And some people are saying, well, that's terrible, that's terrible. But the point is that many of us are in different levels of powers. So students are in one level, professors are on a different level. Berkeley, again, university, I've been there for 14 years, they generated a list of names of students and faculty that they considered anti-Semitic, including my friend Judith Butler, who wrote Gender Trouble, who is also Jewish. So they're saying, if you criticize Israel, you're in trouble. So the students protested, but I wrote a letter, a public letter, which I'm happy to share with you, saying, this is wrong for the university. And some of my colleagues at the university said, this was very brave of you. I'm a tenured professor. They can still mess with me, but I'm hard to fire. And so I was using the little power and leverage I have to protect those who don't have leverage and power. And I think we have to do that with students. We have to do that with parents. Some people are more vulnerable than other people. And I said, let's sit down and talk to them. And what I'm most concerned with is, in some ways, is not simply the most vulnerable standing up, but when the powerful, I live in Silicon Valley or in the Bay Area, California. When Anthropic said, you can't use our algorithms to create automatic autonomous kills, the Pentagon said, we're going to call you a traitor. We're going to destroy you. And they stood up. And ChatGPT said, you can use our algorithms, it's okay. And one of the things you may not know, this may be getting into the weeds, but they had run some tests using algorithms in terms of war games. And on more than one occasion, the algorithm said, if you can't get the Iranians to bend, nuke them. Nuke them. So if no human had been involved, the algorithms, some of those algorithms would move to the next level of nuking them. So ChatGPT, OpenAI said, you can use our algorithms. Anthropic said no. And they're still fighting this. The battle is in court. But it's important for us, wherever we are, to be willing to say no, but also to link arms with others. So the engineers at ChatGPT, the engineers at Google, all signed the letters with Anthropic. So we have to do what we can. And the students are finding their voice. The students are still being prosecuted. The students are still being charged as being anti-Semitic. You know, I just watched my young friends go through graduation, watching them being escorted off a stage because they wore something that was indicating they support Palestine. In a country where we're supposed to have, we care about free speech. So yes, the students are still doing stuff, but we can help them link arms, we can help support them, and then we can figure out what can we do in our respective positions of power to show solidarity with those who have a little less power.
Ha sigut interessant escoltar també el que ens deien d'Europa. No? Com a última pregunta, abans de cedir una mica la paraula també a l'auditori, precisament en el cas de l'Iran, aquesta revolució per la democràcia, aquests crits per la democràcia, sí que els han protagonitzat aquesta gent jove i també moltes dones aquesta, no diré una minoria, sinó l'altra majoria en el seu país. També és un aspecte a subratllar, un aspecte a tenir en compte i que ens mereix la seva valoració.
I have twin daughters who are 25, and I have huge respect and in awe of their generation because they're inheriting so much of the failure of my generation and previous generations, environmental chaos and politics and so forth, and the capitalistic universe that they have to navigate. But they're very clever, and not only they're protesting, they're also finding other ways to express themselves. So again, I'll give an example of the gun violence in the United States. These kids, high school kids, realized that their power as consumers was really important. So they stopped. They went and they basically told major stores, if you sell weapons or if you sell bullets, we're not gonna be your customers. So they've understood where their power lies. I mean, you can have political power. You may not have any political power because the politics is so corrupt. But if your identity is as a consumer, they know how to use that. And I think this is an important aspect of it. Similarly, I don't know whether any of you heard the story, but the USS Gerald Ford, which is one of the big US aircraft carriers,
The biggest.
was heading from Venezuela to Iran, and they were not going to get their leave. And the sailors, they were having a problem with their toilets not flushing and a huge problem of sewage on this ship. And they discovered that these young sailors were putting T-shirts and rope and things like that down the loos, down the toilets to clog them. Now, in anthropology, we have a concept of weapons of the weak, that they may not be able to turn the ship around, literally, but if they can clog the toilets, that ship is no longer functional and it has to go off. And I think that this is something that maybe we're not hearing much in the US Army, of the younger sailors and soldiers who don't want to go to this war, and what it is that they're trying to do to prevent from within. In Iran, similarly, women have led successfully, I want to say, the movement for transformation of the Iranian state and society, culturally, politically, economically, for the last 47 years. The Women Life Freedom movement was the first time in history that women led a movement, a mass protest public movement against a tyrannical, if you want, a regime, an undemocratic dictatorial state. They led it. It was their tactics of nonviolence. It was their tactics of music and dancing and joy and just very feminine and very feminist tactics. And the men and the boys stood with them and stood behind them. This hasn't happened anywhere in history, where the men and boys are standing shoulder to shoulder or they're standing behind the girls. And it was young girls. It was university students and high school students that then gave the courage to their mothers and others to come out. This is, again, now, people might look and say, oh, the regime was really hard, cracked down very hard. Yes, the regime cracked down. The regime, that's the only language they have, violence. But the women were using the language of nonviolence. It's like water and rock. And so after a while of cracking down, they backed down. And the hijab, which was a critical symbol of the Islamist nature of Islam, this is the Islamic Republic of Iran. What was the element of Islamic in the state was the control of women. It still is, legally there's still lots of discrimination, but the hijab was a very important political symbol. It's gone. And it's women who've led it. And it's young women standing on the shoulders of 3 generations of women who fought. But it's this generation that burst the barriers. Young people, similarly, what's amazing about young people right now in Iran is that on the one hand, and as again, generation after generation, people have fought the regime, and shifted the way they engaged. So after 2009, when we had the Green Revolution, what they did was, okay, politics is their life. We're going to live our own lives. And they went and they did their businesses, and they socially, they changed the way they do things and just carried on, and the state couldn't stop them. With this war, we've had another shift, because the war has, in a way, strengthened the regime and consolidated it, because it's fighting an outside force. But at the same time, the regime has had to respond to its own public. And when you hear now the leadership, they're trying to bridge the division between themselves as this kind of theological, ideological force, and this real force, which is a nationalistic, very proud public that doesn't want war and stood against the war, but is also still challenging them. So as and when a peace process emerges, and I'm happy to tell you an example of how I think it could be much more inclusive and transformative, and Spain could play a really important role in enabling that, I think we're going to see some significant changes in Iran, because I don't think that this regime is going to be able to maintain that level of control with a public that it had demonstrated itself to be pro-nation, anti-war, anti-war and anti-tyrants, let's put it that way. Anti-war and anti-tyrants, and, by the way, anti-kings, because we had the monarchists who've been pro-war. So it's a crazy space, but I actually think that there's the potential for transformation is still there. And it's the young will be leading it.
Hem sentit veus a Europa d'aquests kings, també tirans, demanant aquesta guerra contra la població civil, com vam sentir també Premis Nobel de la Pau també demanant la guerra contra el seu poble no fa gaire, o coses grotesques que té aquest moment que vivim. Dèiem que teníem una estona per obrir la veu entre tots i totes. Hem generat una petita fila zero amb dues persones que avui ens acompanyen, que els hi donarem la veu en primer lloc i després també obrirem un torn, que si hi ha molta gent que tingui ganes d'opinar, demanarem que intenteu ser el més breu possibles, perquè també al local ens el tanguen a una hora determinada, que no són les 10 de la nit. Ens acompanyen Reed Brody, ell és advocat internacional de drets humans i antic fiscal de Nova York, que ha dedicat la seva carrera a exigir responsabilitats per abusos de poder. Va ajudar els supervivents a portar Hissène Habré del Txad davant la justícia, va perseguir casos com el d'Augusto Pinochet a Xile també, Jean-Claude Duvalier a Haití, Yahya Jammeh a Gàmbia. Va exposar la tortura de l'administració Bush a Guantánamo i a Abu Ghraib. Va defensar a la periodista Amy Goodman de les acusacions per cobrir les protestes de l'Standing Rock i va dirigir també missions de les Nacions Unides a El Salvador, la República Democràtica del Congo o Nicaragua. Ell és autor de To Catch a Dictator i treballa a Barcelona en la mobilització de la resistència contra aquest senyor tan fantàstic que tenen en aquests moments i encara de president dels Estats Units. Reed, quan tu vulguis.
Hola. Muchísimas gracias a los oradores. Yo concuerdo totalmente con mi compatriota Jan. Yo creo que en este momento en Estados Unidos estamos en una lucha de vida y muerte para salvar la democracia, que tenemos un aspirante dictador o Dios, como dice él. Y lo único que nos separa de esa dictadura es la resistencia. La resistencia de alcaldes, de gobernadores, pero sobre todo y cada vez más de la sociedad civil. Y yo creo que en el primer año de Trump, los primeros 7, 8 meses, se había caracterizado por la subordinación de los contrapoderes tradicionales, ¿no? Decía la prensa, los gabinetes de abogados, que pensaban tratar, apaciguar a Donald Trump, salir con lo suyo. Pero yo creo que en un momento dado eso empezó a cambiar y la resistencia cobró cada vez más fuerza. Hemos visto en las distintas marchas del No King's Day como 7 millones de personas que salieron a la calle Yo soy de New York y he participado muy modestamente en la campaña de Zoran Mandani, que fue realmente, además, un momento de movilización ciudadana como yo nunca había visto desde 40 años. Y como decías, Jan, yo creo que yo concuerdo con la panorama de que los seguidores de Trump quieren pertenecer a algo y que los élites de mi país se han alejado mucho de la gente. Y lo que yo vi en la campaña de Zoran Mandani justamente era un candidato que movilizaba a las personas, que incluía a las personas, que hablaba de cosas muy básicas como el alquiler, los transportes, y era el candidato de los inmigrantes. Y Nueva York es una ciudad de inmigrantes, y paseando por Queens y esos lugares, se notaba una nueva, no sé, como si la gente pertenecía por primera vez a la política. Y yo creo que estamos ganando, estamos comenzando a ganar. Yo tengo cada vez más esperanza de que vamos a salvar por lo menos nuestra democracia. Trump, que ha aniquilado muchos de los contrapoderes, ahora está tratando de jugar con los midterms, está cambiando los distritos, las reglas y todo. Vamos a ver lo que pasa. Quería deciros también que para nosotros es muy importante el actuar de España, de Pedro Sánchez, que realmente fue... Perdón, yo sé que en ese momento y justamente nos duele pensar que además de Le Pen en Francia, que Nigel Farage en Inglaterra, que en 2 años podríamos no tener más a esa resistencia. Pero yo creo que también en Europa tienen que, la tendencia es mala en general. O sea, los élites políticos, tanto en Europa, se han alejado de las personas. La gente no se siente como participante en la política. Y yo creo que tenemos que renovar la democracia, no solamente en Estados Unidos, sino también en Europa, con políticas que llegan a las personas. Con gente, un poco a la imagen de Zoran Mandani, ¿no? De realmente ir a los barrios, hablar con las personas, involucrarlas en la política. La política es cosa de todos nosotros. Y yo creo que solamente así podemos revertir esas tendencias.
Gràcies, Rit. I abans... Has sigut una visió en positiu. Abans deies allà fora, 3 minutos es mucho. No es mucho, es poco. La Naita Nassir és politòloga catalana i iraniana, és màster en Relacions Internacionals per l'Autònoma, especialitzada en l'Iran i en el seu encaix geoestratègic. Ella va néixer també a Teheran, es va exiliar amb la seva família arran de la Revolució Islàmica del 79, primer a Itàlia, després a Barcelona, on resideix des de fa més de 30 anys. Entre el 2003 i el 12 va ser coordinadora de la Casa Àsia, analista de la realitat iraniana en diferents mitjans de comunicació, ha participat en espais del MACBA, del TNC i de l'ICIP, entre d'altres, i des de fa aproximadament 4 anys és una de les veus de referència de la diàspora iraniana a Catalunya en el marc del moviment Dona, Vida i Llibertat. Doncs ara la paraula és per tu. A veure aquests 3 minuts quan duren.
Bona tarda. Abans que res, moltíssimes gràcies. Perdoneu que us doni l'esquena, perquè em sembla que em diuen que haig d'estar aquí. Ha sigut un plaer per algú que forma part de la diàspora sentir veus de tanta categoria com vosaltres, és tot un honor. L'única cosa que m'agradaria dir i preguntar, perquè no puc deixar d'evitar tenir algú com un referent, els dos, necessito que em contestin 2 coses. Una és, com evitem aquest binarisme tan senzill que hi ha al món occidental, que quan crítiques una banda, després és com automàticament estàs donant carta blanca a un altre tema i això costa molt. De fet, també agraeixo molt perquè em sento una mica més acompanyada, perquè fer part de la diàspora en aquests moments m'està costant molt, inclús a nivell personal. No solament és l'activisme, que ja costa en si mateix, sinó també quan no tens la línia de war, tirans i monarquia kings, costa molt tenir una mica de veu i costa una mica també fer entendre que no tot s'hi val. I també m'agradaria saber que realment, i és una pregunta per la Sanam, amb permís, realment creus que el règim iranià en aquests moments es pot transformar o realment s'ha de crear un canvi absolut del règim? Ja sé que és molt complicat, no és preguntar qui hi ha d'alternativa, sinó si realment els 47 anys de tirania, de repressió, ja no donen lloc a una alternativa de reformisme, sinó a una ruptura total. Gràcies.
Moltes gràcies a tu. Doncs si vols començar tu a respondre.
Thank you, thank you. I just want to echo the issue that, for many years, I've been a voice of no war, no sanctions. And the assumption was that then you must be pro-regime. And I was saying no, because what I'm trying to say is that war and sanctions reinforce the regime. Openness is what erodes and enables the transformation. So, and now we've seen a war did not end the regime. So let's, before we destroy the rest of the world, let's stop and shift strategy. So to your point about can there be transformation or reform or whatever. Look, first of all, the regime, I was going back to Iran from 1986, and the last time I was there was 2015. Intermittent periods where I couldn't go because I was got into trouble, but, the regime changed. The regime changes all the time. That's why it survives. It adapts constantly. It's like a live organism, right? It moderates its behavior towards society. It will crack, always, the pattern has been crack down, then back down. Crack down, then back down. It's constantly giving space. That's why we see the changes that are there. But we can't underestimate that this is a system that is geared for survival, right? My father, who lived through and had to deal with them for 30 years, his description was, this is a system without a system within which a certain system works. Okay? That's the essence of this state. Now, what I see and and thank you for the question, is that this moment of war is not working, economic blockade, sanctions, etc., is no longer tolerable for the rest of the world as well. So we have to come to some kind of accord. This moment is actually where countries like Spain can also play a role, because you can either have a return of the adversarial nature of US-Iran relations back into politics and economics, right? And the state consolidates itself because it's constantly thinking that it's being threatened from outside. And it takes that paranoia and directs it domestically, because it constantly thinks that 3 people protesting, whether it's economics or environment or whatever, are agents of the outside world, right? We can either return to that, and they're good at repressing those kinds of forces. Or what we could be doing is to say, that model of peacemaking is actually a negative peace, and it's not sustainable. It always remains a brittle peace, and the threat of war will always be there again. And so let's take this moment and have a grand bargain. Let's envision and transform how we think about it. Let's make it first of all, make it regional, so that the question of Lebanon and Palestine is also on the table. The question of curtailing Israel de facto is on the table, because they are a critical source of so many of the problems. But also, let's make sure that we are leaning in to what the Iranians are currently saying. Now, what are they saying? The Iranians are saying the Hormuz Straits, as you come through, the ships come through and they have to give a fee. This is not a toll. This is for environmental protection. Okay? If I were in charge, I'd be like, that's great. I completely agree with you. We have destroyed the environment. There's oil spillages all over the islands. Let's help you create a working group or a committee or something that involves the local islands and the people and the environment, your own environment department. And let's have the UN present to really think about how you deal with the environment and reinforce it with international law, right? So, and if you do something like that, it means that the money that's coming through, there's going to be all the stakeholders in the Iranian space that are concerned about the environment, whether it's the Persian Gulf environment or whether it's all the other places that have been polluted. All the local stakeholders will have a say in how much money is coming, where that money should go, how it can go for cleanup, and so forth. That's transformation, because it's making it inclusive of the citizens as well, and it's making the finances a bit more transparent. Now imagine we do that not only for environment, but for the health sector that's been destroyed, for the universities that were bombed, for the schools that were bombed, by the houses that were bombed, the companies that were bombed. You take it and you say, we as the world want to enable Iran to have peace and recover and benefit. And Iran has said that they want the peace agreement to be anchored and sort of verified by the UN Security Council, by the UN. So they're bringing multilaterals in. And the United States is saying we want the IAEA to be there for verifying the nuclear question. So they want the multilaterals. But why don't we say, take the whole family of the multilaterals? WHO can be with the health sector, UNESCO can be with the heritage sites, as I say, UNEP can be with the environment. But it's anchored in Iranian society as well. Let the university professors and the university proctors be part of the conversations around how you rebuild Sharif University and the University of Isfahan and all these places. That would be a transformative process. And it would anchor it and it would enable people to work together and really think about a different future. Is it democracy in the way that we understand it? No. Is it a shift of state-society relations? Yes. I think that this is possible. There's no reason why it shouldn't be possible. But it's a question of who's willing to come forward and speak like that. And the reason why I say Spain is important is because Spain it's a window to Europe. Europe has imposed sanctions on Iran because of human rights. So this could be one of the ways that it says, look, why don't you do this? And we'll think about addressing the sanctions question. And Spain was also the country that stood up in Europe and said, we're not going to support war and we're not going to let the planes fly over. And that has real value for Iran in a world that has not said a word. No university has stood up and said anything in support of all the universities that were bombed. What does that make you feel like? Especially when we have universities in Iran like Sharif University, where 98% of their students are coming to MIT and to Stanford and winning all the prizes and being part of the technology and so forth. Not one university in the United States stood up and said, hey, we think it's really bad. Not one hospital stood up. The Pasteur Institute barely made a statement about the Pasteur Institute being hit. So the fact that Spain came out against the war and has opened its embassy, I think is a really important confidence-building measure, which can then be built on to think about a more transformative process of inclusive peace, which is good for the country, and would be a way of enabling the transparency and making sure that the resources that could be coming in are going for the benefit of the people and not just a handful of pockets. Thank you.
Gràcies. Sí, no? Jo crec, m'estan fent així, estem molt fora de temps. Si hi ha algú que no pugui resistir la necessitat, veus, ja ho sabia que hi hauria algú que no podria resistir la necessitat.
Ara?
Sí.
Moltíssimes gràcies per la intervenció, superagradable poder tenir un espai i escoltar veus diferents, però jo volia preguntar una cosa perquè trobo no parlar-ne, tal com Anaïta intentava preguntar, és condemnar la situació de Netanyahu i Trump, que ho tenim claríssim, que són dolents i fan res per benefici de les altres persones, i no parlar dels règims dels ayatollahs, trobo és com una mica no comentar allò que la Sanam comenta, que la majoria dels alumnes que surten dels millors universitaris d'Iran se'n van a l'estranger, el per què està passant això, o no parla del tema de totes les morts executats en Iran per al règim dels ayatollahs, posar tots els mateixos sacs que Iran i el règim, la seva gent són el mateix, també és una altra cosa. Parlem dels valors. Llavors, jo pregunto si parlem dels valors, ciutadania avançada per nosaltres que estem aquí i tenim aquesta oportunitat i privilegi de poder decidir i parlar les coses en veu alta, no es pot posar al mateix lloc quan la gent d'Iran no poden parlar mai, que fins avui, en 86 dies, la gent no tenia internet, la gent no pot parlar, no pot comentar sobre el que passa allà. Llavors, jo volia preguntar a quin moment, quan parlem dels valors i ciutadania avançada, privilegi de poder viure lliurement, parlar d'un pau que pensem en el futur, les dones i persones que volen tenir un futur més agradable, a quin moment arribarà als escenaris com aquest? Em sap greu perquè a mi m'agradaria tal com parlar-ne de tota la situació de guerra, que és absolutament una bogeria que està passant al món, a quin moment es pot condemnar els dictadors d'aquest tipus de països i la seva gent que pateix en aquests països, i quan aquesta gent podrà tenir veu. I llavors, per mi, pensant honestament que aquest règim canviarà és una mica com... Però de què parlem? El règim no ha parat ni executant la seva gent durant la guerra. És que m'agradaria parlar una mica sobre aquests temes, perquè...
Perquè et fa mal. I es nota.
I
es nota. Sí, gràcies. Gràcies.
Sorry. You know, this is why am I against sanctions and war is because sanctions and war are ways in which we isolate a country and we enable the worst elements of that state to become empowered. That's why. If you have more openness, if you have more ability for ordinary people to run their own businesses and have their own interactions, as was happening even in the 1980s and early 90s, it reduces the power of the most extreme forces in a country. So, to me, it's a counterfactual, but this is one thing. Second, how do we raise the voices of citizens in another country? You know, ironically, I think that the voices about human rights abuses in Iran, whether it's executions and others, is one of the most prominent things that people hear about Iran. A lot of people, when you think about Iran, they're executing people, the women are oppressed. They don't hear that 65% of university professors are women. They don't hear that 70-80% of university students are women. So it's a question of the lens. Now, my entire family has been persecuted by this regime. So I'm not a fan of the regime, but I'm saying that when we look at a society, we need to look at the totality of it. Because I could sit here and say to you, did you know that in the United States, on average, every year, the police in broad daylight is killing 1,500 people. The police is shooting 1,500 people on average a year. That's a pretty horrific thing to think, but it's happening in America. We don't look at America through the lens of how much police violence there is. We look at America through all its multiplicity of everything else. So I think that when we think about places, it's important to understand the complexity, but also understand that the policies that we have here may actually be reinforcing the worst elements over there. And so if 47 years of pressure and sanctions and the threat of war have emboldened and strengthened a particular cohort of people, maybe there is other strategies that we should be having. And maybe it's important to look and listen to the voices in Iran that don't speak out. Because I haven't been there in 10 years, but I was there 10 years ago, and it was a very different society to what it was in the 1980s. My sister and my nephew were there last year, and they were saying it's a very different society to what it was 8 years ago. So there is a lot that's going on. There's a lot of other things that we may not hear about. But when it's distilled outwards and we only see the negative, that can also be a skewed vision of what we have. And then finally, one last thing that I would say, yes, I would really like it if the Europeans and others, or Mr. Trump for that matter, as part of his 10-point peace plan, had said things like, stop taking political prisoners or release the political prisoners as one of the conditions of stopping the war. But he didn't. He used human rights to go to war. He used human rights to go to war to kill more Iranian civilians, to poison more Iranian civilians, and human rights was nowhere on the agenda of his 10-point peace plan. So if that's the way the world is going to deal with Iranians, the most that we can say is stop making it worse for people there. Stop making it worse so that they don't have their medicine for their cancer and their elderly and their people, just stop making the economics 10 times worse with sanctions. It's already bad. The corruption is integral to the sanctions. So there are different ways that we can speak about this. And I think that it's important to have that complexity and that mosaic that we speak about. Because as I say, the narrative of this is a terrible regime, they kill their own people, therefore we must go to war against them, gave us this war. And this war is pretty horrific. And if it starts again, the people that are going to be most damaged are the Iranian public. This generation and generations forward. It's a tough situation to be in, but that's the complexity we have to hold. And that's the complexity that I'm trying to also convey in my work and in the public conversations that we have. It's hard, it's not easy.
Ella, no tenim més temps. Mira, jo he començat gràcies a l'organització com a periodista i això que acabes de fer tu després de l'increscendo que hem viscut amb aquestes dues grans personalitats ens porta a un moment en què com a mediadora transformativa dic, ostres, que ara estem al moment, però és que se'ns ha acabat el temps. A nosaltres, jo agraeixo profundament, a més ha fet una cosa molt gràfica ella que ha sigut tancar la llibreta, agraeixo profundament a tots dos que ens hagin volgut il·luminar el cor perquè ens ha il·luminat també el cap. Vull un fort aplaudiment per ells, que capturem aquesta energia i ens l'emportem. El Cristian ha començat saludant-vos i parlant-vos d'aquest Barcelona for Peace i jo crec que és el moment de reblar-ho amb la intervenció de la regidora que avui ens acompanya de l'Ajuntament de Barcelona, Maria Eugènia Gai, que ens ha de parlar una miqueta també per cloure aquest acte d'aquesta aposta de la ciutat de Barcelona per la pau.
Moltíssimes gràcies, però francament el que deies... Després de...
D'això, costa,
Exacte. Jo crec que després d'aquestes veus tan autoritzades, tan compromeses, tan brillants, doncs es fa molt difícil més que donar-los les gràcies molt sinceres per la seva assistència avui aquí, per compartir amb nosaltres tots aquests coneixements i aquest enriquiment que sens dubte ajudarà a construir una Barcelona molt més solidària, encara molt més inclusiva i molt més compromesa amb els drets humans, perquè atès el moment tan complex que estem visquent a nivell internacional, doncs poder reflexionar sobre el que està passant en el món i tornar a posar els drets humans en el centre de tot tipus d'acció, tant política com econòmica, social, cultural, doncs esdevé imprescindible. Així que també agrair-vos molt sincerament a tots vosaltres la presència, la vostra predisposició i interès també a participar activament d'aquest diàleg i, sens dubte, Barcelona per la pau, més forta que mai i, com sempre, la diplomàcia de ciutats ha d'estar també en el centre perquè els governs canvien, els estats no assumeixen potser els lideratges que han d'assumir com si ho ha fet el nostre president, així que les ciutats hem de seguir aixecant la veu i lluitant i liderant precisament aquests moviments que tornin a posar els drets humans en el centre. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much.
Gràcies. Thank you. Gràcies.